Hi there. I figured it's about time to do a video. We'll see how long it be. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see me since I'm close to getting to bed, and I try to have it somewhat dark. It's not as dark as it looks like, but anyway, I. To be honest, I had quite a dip just less than an hour ago. That was much deeper than it was. Not terribly deep, but it lasted for maybe 2 to 3 hours, and I got out of it for different reasons. But I get inspired by some YouTube videos and so forth. But I would also argue that it was one YouTube video that made me into that state, and was I could go deep into that. But what came out of all this was that was a realization. That was that because I stumbled when I didn't really search for it, but I stumbled on a video that about happiness and loneliness. That it's quite strong correlation, and even for health. And that was something that terrified me, because I tried to be quite healthy. I want to live long and so forth. So, but since I seem to live a quite solitary life and feel like recently it's not that bad. I mean, I'm not everything under. It's not particularly good. I'm not really optimizing for happiness, I would say. In some respects I really do that, but in some respects I'm not. I'm more like the big picture, my whole life and whole civilization and so forth. But of course, happiness is something into that. But anyway, health is something I want to, because I think it's important in order to live long, and also it's health and happiness could be necessary to be creative sometimes. It's not necessarily the truth, because sometimes if you're more rational, you might be less happy and so forth. I sorry to harp on this particular thing, but what I want to come to is that I realized that often it's negative thoughts about our circumstances out of an egocentric view, and I sometimes have some slight small reluctance to over-empathizing about reducing the ego, because in some sense I've viewed people who are too far down that road to be I can appreciate jolliness, but if you're too, I don't want to say that you can be too jolly, but you can be too, if you, and I'm hesitant to say it because it's really about character. There is something in some type of character in human being that I can admire, that seems to be reduced when you're too, like jolliness have this component of being unsincere when it really matters. I'm not saying that more jolliness produces that, but there seems to be some type of correlation and some sadness, so to speak, sometimes signaling to me a deep care of circumstances. And so that's the only thing I have against it. But anyway, that's not what I brought up. I brought it up because the importance of it, really, this selflessness, and not being too egocentric. And what I realized that I had on some level forgotten, and on some level actually I made new connections about it, was that it had three components that was really made it persuasive for me to pursue. And the first one was, well, could say that it is what I already said about it makes you happier and it makes you healthier. But what I wrote down was, one, it's actually congruent with my purpose, which is, I think I've stated it before, my purpose is to motivate our civilization in order to accelerate our civilization's advancement in any area of human existence. And it basically means doing something good for society. I wrote it down maybe 2.5 years ago, and it's approximately what I strive for. And it's helping me to navigate, but it's not necessarily perfectly formulated. And the second thing was that I've as I said, I had this reluctance to too much emphasis on reducing ego, and it's connected to, I see myself as really striving to be moral, but some people that are moral, I tend to view as overly moral in the sense that they, let me explain this, because this is more overly moral in the sense that they're so emotionally moral that they are prepared to make things worse in pursuit of what is emotional and moral. They can abuse what would be morally right in the long run. It's not to say that you should sacrifice one person for 10 people. It's not really that, but it's more like they're so emotionally attached to some moral principles that they don't have a contemplation and a moral boldness to appear immoral in order to do what is moral. That is what I really have a reluctance to. So I have a quite intimate and deep moral structure, I was about to say, but I don't want to say that I'm especially enlightened about this topic and say that I have a much deeper structural moral basis than others, but I do have a strong, and I've always had a contemplation of, for example, quite young I was when I not this particular example, it was somewhere in the teenage period, but it comes from even earlier. But I said that, for example, it will be very immoral to, if you had Hitler today, or any criminal really, to give someone punishment like Hitler, for example, only because he deserves it, or you think he deserves it, is morally flawed. The reason we seek that type of punishment, it feels good, is because it creates incentives that are not in line with doing it again. So it deters people. So the function of punishment is to deter people from doing it again, or deter people to do it in the first hand. So in accepting that it won't have that component of deterring people from doing it again, doing it in the first place, except for reduce that, then there's no moral, it can't be morally defensible to impose pain on to people even such terrible as Hitler, even though it's emotionally. And that's sort of, I just picked Hitler, I could pick anyone. But it is true, though, that the thought experiment could collapse in some sense, because in the real world it's always connected, what you do and the punishment. The punishment is always a reflection on the society's value of what you do and what the consequences are. And it's a signaling to people to not doing what the person gets punished for. And so it's incorporated, so you can't really have the discussion, but on all basis, it's like if it's hypothetical, but if everyone died, just immediately, and civilization would never be restored, and the only one who survived was Hitler, it would not make sense to wish him to have a painful life, then I would wish him a pleasure, because it wouldn't have. But again, it's the same type of reasoning. We will always be connected in society. But anyway, I have quite deep moral opinions about, where I have moral standards, so to say. I'm not. I don't want to. The word virtue signaling is quite. I don't want to signal my virtues too much. But I just. That's the picture I have. I put. I don't think it's too much virtue. Too much virtue signaling to just say that I put very heavy emphasis on morals. My second point was really that being non-selfish is in line with that commitment that I have to be moral or virtuous in some sense. And so the first component, as I said, was no, I forgot it. It was how can I forget it? It's in line with my purpose. The second is moral, it's virtuous, and the third is connected to it's really the same as the second, but it's to really, well, I put it as it's the only true way to deserved recognition. It's the only opportunity to deserved recognition. But you shouldn't. It's an unsecure way. And you shouldn't pursue it as wanting it. You shouldn't want it, but often in the long run, you turn out to be rewarded for it, but you could never act upon it, and you don't know that the action will result in. It may even be the case that behaving more immoral or selfish will make you more recognizable in the whole of your life, because you might hide things for people, and that's of course a terrible path to follow in life because it's immoral. But you might be perceived more moral than if you actually act courageous and virtuous. And that's the path I think people should take in life, really, to behave morally, even though you will be perceived as immoral. And so I thought about that, and so that's the last component, that it's you're not guaranteed to get any reward for it, but eventually you might get it, and that's the only way you can get it, and at the same time being deserving it. And so deserved, if it's deserved, then it's deserved, then it's okay, then it's fine that you get it. But you might also not get it, and that doesn't really matter in how your outlook in life, because you should not navigate towards it for that reason. You should not navigate towards moral or virtue necessarily for personal gain. It's but it will have the consequence that that's really, it's like the question. I actually wrote down the first thing I wrote down on this point 3 was Aragorn, because my association goes to Aragorn in Lord of the Rings and to Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. Both, no one of them wants power, but it end up, at least in Lord of the Rings, ends up having power. And I do recognize that my I won't say inspiration, but sort of inspiration is connected to that, and that might be there is some subconscious sort of motive for me to strive for that, because I think we can't never really get around our genetic ego to want to. But I've talked about that earlier, that it's sort of correlated, that if someone in an egoistic manner have a program in the brain that makes them behave morally and virtuous, then they get rewarded for that genetically, then that's really a good thing. If they get rewarded for something that is really good for society, even though it's on some level genetically egoistic. But anyway, so I do recognize that fact that it's some sort of inspiration. I think there is some part of me that is triggered by it, but it's the way we. I don't think there's a way to come around that. As long as you're, even though it's on some level selfish, it's as long as it works as an inspiration, and the overall impact on society is positive for people, then that's great. So yeah, that was one thing I thought about. But and it also connects to, like I've been talking about it earlier. I meditate, and I actually trying out Sam Harris Waking Up podcast for, I guess it's almost like 6 months now, and it might have some impact. I think it has. It gives me some perspectives, but it's something I've been doing for a very long time, and to be honest, the last couple of months, from the influence of Peter Thiel, I've been questioning it. I really thought about stopping it. I actually did. I've done it now and then during the years, but I actually did it among many other lifestyle changes. I think I've talked about this during the past, I think 3-4 months ago, but since there were so many other things I neglected, I just noticed that I became quite unhappy, so I referred back and continued to meditate and all those other things, eating healthy and so on and so forth. But anyway, I will test again to stop meditate, but I suspect that it will make me more unhappy. But one component anyway that I brought up Sam Harris in his podcast, because he, not that often, but sometimes he brings up some exercises of really wishing people well, like people you know that you're close to, and really wishing them well, so doing it with friends or family members, like my parents. And I actually noticed it seems to work, and it's a continuation of something that I've just slightly experimented with now and then during last 2.5 years. Not really that much. Sometimes now and then I've experimented with it, and it's basically been sometimes just I've done this type of what's it called, appreciation exercises, or no, it's called gratitude practices, and one thing of them in just naming people that you're happy to have in your life or have had in your life. And so that's one thing that I've been doing. And other thing, this was quite long ago, it was more than about 2 years ago I did this, and I also did slightly later, but not so differently, half a year, I did sort of really focusing on one, like for example when I got on a train, I just thought about really happy intentions towards people, thinking about people in a very, really positive manner, not a skeptical one. I'm not necessarily very skeptical, but I am sort of, I think it's common to many people, they're sort of semi insecure and on the fence sort of to strangers, or has some sort of negative conception, even though it might be very slightly, and not necessarily negative attitude towards them, but sometimes a little of it, and also a insecurity. But I started to think it more about in terms of just think like people are kind and this is a great place to be in and so forth. And here my jolliness detector goes off again, because it is sort of many people. I think the reason we are like this is one reason. I think we on some level we're and I think this goes quite deep into what's masculine. I think many people associate some type of masculinity with even with the most masculine type, or the sort of dark masculinity. Well, there's a word around now these days about toxic masculinity. That's not really what I'm addressing here, even though it's correlated. But if I say just dark masculinity, and I'm really referring to being a strong man in psyche and in a strong man in psyche and intelligence, and in body too, you could say, and strong and big, and you're decisive, and you're sort of aggressive, and on top of that, what makes it really what makes it dark is that you make use of people and you manipulate people to your own advantage, and you get better off by doing it, and you can get out because you're so smart and so talented, you can get around with it. And I think that that's actually attractive to some women, and I think it's evolutionary adapted to be attracted to such men in some way, in the same way that as it is. It's really the basis for narcissism and Machiavellianism and psychopathy and so forth. So it is working, and it might be. I made the argument, not here, but actual long things I thought about it, or at least first, it was about probably 2 years ago, also, since I first stumbled into the thought. But it's probably easier to succeed with that behavior today than it was earlier in civilization, especially when we're living in tribes before civilization. Because if you did something really bad, it's hard to get around it. You can for sure, but today you can always move to another town, to another company. There are some, for sure there are some consequences, but you can manipulate your way if you're really intelligent. At least what I think. I never tried, but so there is. So why did I get into this? Well, it was a jolliness thing, because I think many men are afraid of being associated with weakness. That is, in some sense, the opposite to this, like this strong. It is. I think there is a sort of tension between, on the one side, this strong and deceitful, manipulative person, or a weak, genuine. Like, if you're really friendly as a man, really, really friendly, you take a risk, and that is to be perceived as weak, even though there is an immense strength in being kind, and it's superior, really. I would argue morally it's definitely superior to this strong, deceitful, and manipulative person. And even the weak man is in some weak and not so moral, could be argued is more moral than the strong deceitful, because the strong is doing more damage. But in the same way, if you're weak in having a malicious agenda, and if you're strong and having, I guess your moral value should be the same, even though the strong and a competent person will do more damage. But anyway, but if you're only weak, and then it's not as bad as for sure being really competent and manipulative and so forth. But so I think this is interesting, because, as I said, that my jolliness, sensitivity, yeah, I do want to emphasize, though, that jolliness is not necessarily something bad. I'm just saying there is something that I react to when I see much of it, and that is that some of the people being very jolly will be perceived as weak. I'm not saying that jolly, that's wrong about the way, and I'm not saying that everyone who's very jolly will be perceived that way. I'm just saying that people will associate some negative thing about that, if it's weakness or if it's lack of taking advantage of other people, which is the second thing, is of course something bad, a trait that they avoid by being jolly, but which is a good thing. But that there is something to it, and I think that you can be one. This is a different aspect. You can be jolly, and, as I said, avoid difficult topics, and thus not be concerned about what really matters. And so when I think about someone, like, no, I don't want to go too much into myth and characters in Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and this is not something that comes from these movies. I'm going to emphasize that it could be that my conception of it is formed by something in the culture that has the similar influence on these characters as it had my conception of them. But I had this conception, I think, before. Well, I did have before I watched these movies and so forth. And that is to have, I do perceive some, and I said it when I was really a teenager, that remember discussing this with my father, and not really about character, but I just said that I admire people who, there is something in worrying that I admire, and that is that if you're worrying, you're concerned about something, and if you're concerned about something, you're actually wanting to do something better, as opposed to being just not concerned with it, although it is sort of easy to overemphasizing, and I think me as a person, I have overemphasized it, or at least not the balance of jolliness to it, which is a good counterforce that should be practiced for sure. But when I view, for example, again, these characters, Jon Snow and Aragorn, they're not really that happy. They are, on some level, mysterious, which they are on some level, they are silent in some sense, but they are also not, they're concerned about the good for everyone, and they're concerned about their situation, and they're sort of, not really in a happy mood all the time, and they have a concern. And there's something about a character that really has deep concern for other people, in which it inflicts their happiness, that is admirable. In some sense, they are sacrificing their own happiness for making it the good. although I would argue that for me at least, when I conceptualize it as a non-selfishness, it really makes you more happy to have a concern for the civilization. At least that's the way I framed it. It could be otherwise, and I think it can be otherwise. And the concern for civilization and it's really intertwined, because a concern for yourself could make you unhappy too, and it could also, a concern for yourself can also be making yourself better, and making yourself better and more competent could be, is the only way to do more good. If you're, it's like he said, I really love, like the quote from Charlie Munger, who says that you have, or he's quoting someone else, but says that you have a moral responsibility to be rational, and rational meaning is one way of putting competent. So you have a moral responsibility of being competent, because if you're not competent, at least you should try to be, then you can't have much influence on the world in a positive manner. Of course, the unfortunate fact is, if the more rational and competent you are, the more harm you can do too. So it's really about power, and but anyway, it's still good to optimize for self-development, and there is in some sense that I have a very strong connection. I make a strong connection. I'm not saying that it's necessarily good to do it to such a degree that I have in the past, but I have a very strong connection between a concern and worry and improvement. I associate those two very hard, and so that's I associate them very hard actually, and that's why I can sometimes get a sort of reluctance to too much jolliness, because I really associate it with being not that serious. Jolly being non-serious, but that is not really I think constructive if you overuse it. You must have both concepts, I guess, and I'm going into this. It's not a clear pattern train of thought here in this video, but I think it's really interesting topics to think about, and that's why I think this third point motivated me to say, like, being an Aragorn, strive for doing the best, and even though you might not get a reward for it, and so on and so forth. But so that was, and I think that to be more personal here, I just because there's a lot of things going on in my head right now. It's just like for 2 days ago, the day before yesterday, I think I'd read about Gödel, sort of the uncertainty principle, and he says something like, if there is a closed system or a system, you can't by any means prove the system in the system itself, which means that you can't really prove the basic arithmetic of mathematics by arithmetic in mathematics. And I also thought about, like, rationality and how far it goes, and could you really know anything? Should you count up? How do you know anything to stand upon? And really this philosophical sort of, it was my another sort of dip I had, in addition to the one I had for an hour ago or so, and that was a much slighter dip. But then I don't remember exactly what came out of it, but it was still on some level a constructive thought, because I reconsidered many of my thoughts about what I had done the last couple of weeks. And then today actually, I'm not saying that I was stuck there in 2 days, but today I got another thought, and that was that any empirical, like scientific knowledge or knowledge in general that is sort of reliable. So again, of course, reliability is what the question is about here, but take Newton's principles, for example, or his laws. Even though it appeared to be not perfect or wrong in some sense, it was a very good approximation to the truth, even though Einstein undermined them, and they're still a very good approximation in just human life. And for that reason, it seems like, well, another connection just come up. I'll come to that soon, but yeah, all the knowledge that we have, even though we can't know for sure, and instead of just doubting everything, and at least if you have some sort of pragmatic and practical way of handling your life, making decisions, you have to base it on something, and you can't just think forever, even though that's something I tend to do, but I won't say I'm stuck all the time. I have some agency now and then. But I also, in general, over the long term, tend to think a lot instead of acting, or at least last 3 years that's been my approach. But thinking of maybe changing that approach somewhat, and then this rule of thumb is quite good, that much of the science we have, and even though it might be wrong in some sense, we don't know about consciousness and all that contains, and we don't know about like philosophical notions of like science and how that is going potentially to be undermined. And not saying that it can, but who knows. And yeah, but my point is, you can't know for sure. You can know for 99.9, but in some way I want to. But it's really about probability. What are you betting on? But as long as the current scientific literature and knowledge is quite reliable as approximation, it's still good to base your decisions on. And even though that might sound obvious to people, I sort of forgot it, or at least in my deepest contemplations. And it's funny that this is oftentimes associated with mood. The more critical you take, the more philosophical and skeptical you get. It's also associated with the skepticality of your mind, really. And not just what I mean, the rational skepticism is very closely associated with the emotional skepticism. And that's just a funny observation. But anyway, the connection I wanted to add on to this, that actually popped up in my mind right now, is that it is really, because I made this analogy, that the genes are like, I often think it's political system, conservative versus progressive. And if you think about, and it's also about scientific paradigms and so forth, like the established, what is current now is often like the organism with its genes, and it's so, and the reality is that mutations is the only thing that will make the next organism better, like really much better. Is also selection long term and so forth, but mutations are really what makes the individual better off, despite the fact that most mutation doesn't. So most of them doesn't matter. Many of them make the organism worse, but most likely make it better. And I think it's the same thing with ideas, that that it is both true that most of them doesn't improve, but it's also true that the only way to improve is to replace. So and that's really, so the first thing is really in favor of conservatives, the other thing is in favor of more progressive approach. And what's interesting about this is that the use of approximations like scientific knowledge, all what we know, you could throw in religion there also if you want to make that argument. I'm not saying for or against this right now, but just take science, at least I can say, is more easily digestible for people if you're adopting and not questioning scientific realities and scientific truths, such as genes and chemistry and all that, and basing your decisions upon them. Then you're not doing a thoughtful analysis enough to make up the absolute best decision you possibly can make, because then you would reconsider. It would be the equivalent of trying to get the best gene combination ever, like doing all the mutations on all possible genes. You can't really do it, but you can make improvements. The question is, how far will you go? How ambitious will you be? And the more ambitious, the higher risk of failure. So in reality, there's some value of relying on what has all been established, and that being, so if I'm talking about established science as the genes that we already have, and alternative paradigms, other truth that you could get if you really contemplate things really deep enough, could alter this thing, like Einstein altered Newton and so forth. So that's equivalent of a gene that is better, and so on and so forth. But in your daily life, you have to accept some level of the genes, meaning accept some level of the science that it is, and base your decisions from them. So I actually think that's profoundly great. I shouldn't pat myself too much on the back, but I actually think that was a good way of putting it. Yes, and yeah, but anyway, is there anything more that I could talk about? Well, it's Christmas soon, and I just thought that I would like to be somewhat more jolly. And yeah, I really got a deep appreciation for human connection and thinking good about people when I wrote these 3 points. Anyway, so, and it came up to me that I felt that, I think I mentioned it before, that I felt quite more alive after doing this type of videos, longer videos, when I've done it some days and so forth. And I got to think about that, and then I thought that, well, that connects quite good with my 3 points. Thinking good about people, the social component of being a human being, incredibly important. Yeah, so what could I talk about more? Maybe I could play something for you. I've never played guitar earlier on these videos, but I could play some part. It's not perfectly tuned, but if you're not a musician, you won't maybe bother that much. I could play so many different different songs, but what should I pick? Oops. Okay, I can't play the continuation of that because I can't see really where the bars is, so anyway, I could play, well, I'm not really sure I want to sing here, but I could at least, and this is a song when I actually watched the Hobbits movies. I talked about it earlier that I allowed myself to watch some movies like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and so forth. And I realized that in the last movie, even though that's not the best movie, there is a song. There is like the Misty Mountains in the first, that goes like, far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, and so forth. We must do, and so there is another one that is only in like humming. They in that Mr. Mountain they're also humming like in the background, but this is only in humming, and I figured I could pick some parts of a short that made it sort of matching the humming and doing the humming myself, and it's not perfect, but this is how it's, and it's quite, I try to do it as low as possible because I think that's more dramatic, but it also had the consequence of not being perfect, and sometimes I fail the more darker or lower tones, but I'll give it a try at least. It's very simple, but let's see, I have to think. I've forgotten how it goes. I've forgotten, totally forgotten. I'm sorry, I've forgotten how it goes. Sorry, I just want to figure out what it was. I just want to. I must find it. I get. What was it? Just another similar short something. It's up here. Just another. Also. Very similar to us. Ja. Nej. Or something like that. bit slower. Could actually I made a new song instead then. I don't know what this tune is, but I can't come up with the original one. But this is an alternative, I guess. I don't know where. Well, I'm really disappointed I couldn't come up with it. I lost my. I really like when I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. I'm going to find it, and I don't want to stop the video. Sorry, you probably think I'm just really boring and you don't want to follow here, but I don't fucking care. I just want to find that damn. Where's. How can I find? I have to log into Spotify. I never do that on my laptop because I can't use my phone because I'm just using it, and for some reason I suspect that I deleted Spotify. No, I didn't. Here. Why can't I just remember it? Anyway, where is my... Oh, that was not the one. There it is. And I will probably never find it. Here. Oops. Oh. But this is really amazing. Slightly lower tone than that, but oops, somewhat too low. Could use this way too. that was sort of the worst performance I've ever done, and my voice was not that clear, but anyway, I think you're tired of self-introspecting thoughts and sort of strange music, but is there anything I could do to end this video? Is there anything I don't really have any incentive to stop it yet, even though I could, but I'm going to push through because I think it's still good practice anyway. Even though I'm perfectionist as I am, I have to say it that I'm not really that proud of the last 15 minutes because I love music and I'm perfectionist, and I don't think that was really what I wanted to deliver. But anyway, I really think that when I listen to the end, really, when the burials and so forth in the movie, it's really good song, and I really like this low bass. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must, oh herregud, shit, we must away a break of day to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night, the fire was red, its flames spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. I won't continue to criticize my own song there. It was, well, for some reason I don't want to. It's better if you not restrict your sort of how much you push, how loud you sing, but it gets much better. But I have it's quite late in the night, and I suspect that it might be heard somewhere. Someone who really don't want to be heard, hear me, not know in the night. But anyway, I do really appreciate that song. I think it's, yeah, I like this deep sort of bass voice and that calm and that sort of sorrow intertwined in it. I really do appreciate that strongly. Mr. Mountains was quite long a favorite of mine, sort of. And yeah, I think I will do another try and bore you with some more music. I guess it's good to get a more accurate picture of who I am and what interest I have, even though it might sound, I don't know how this is perceived, but I really like this. Let's see, so get to the tune right. Now I think I start with a D, which is quite deep, and which explains why I'm doing like this all the time, because I want to get to deep tones. Oh, I have actually didn't get to that deep. I found it easier to do in the morning, but anyway, that's a D. Ooh, ooh. For I'm sure I can handle that. For for oh shit. For the mountains. For we'll go with an E instead. For but I'm not used to it actually. For no. Let's try C just to challenge myself. For the misty mountains cool to dun for the misty mountains cool to dungeons deep and caverns old. We must away a break of day to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the high, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. I actually noticed that I'm not that accurate on tone. In addition to not, well, it's partly because I can't put all my effort into it and sing as loud as I want to, but it's also that I have, well, I guess that's the main reason, but sometimes when I'm not been singing for a while, it's harder to actually sing accurately, to set the tones really. So yeah, I know I throw in lots of excuses, and you could say that that's sort of insecurity, and maybe it's true, maybe it's also true that I'm not shouldn't do that, but it's because partly because I'm so perfectionistic. I don't really like when it's not perfect. But anyway, is there anything left I could speak of today? Well, I could bring up, well, there's lots of topics that I could bring up. Where should I go? It's really like exercise in thought. I've not been thinking that much lately. Well, in comparison with otherwise, I've been watching movies and reading and studying and so forth. But yeah, this thing about social relationships is really And I've said earlier that been quite content of being sort of isolated. Not isolated is a strong word, but being quite much on my own. And so there's one thing that has some type of negative implications on your health, and happiness. But what I'm trying to get at, because since I've chosen it myself, and I'm not sure that I want, like the social relationships I have, I'm not sure I want more of them. I like being by my own. So, and it's non-wanted loneliness that is the harmful one, really. But at the same time, I confess that oftentimes, or suspect at least, that I do feel better when I've met people, but I'm not necessarily convinced that it's really dissatisfaction with your situation, and like, for example, the social relationship that I think is harmful, and I indeed have a dissatisfaction with my, like, what I want to do with society and so forth. Now I'm being quite honest, I just realized that why not? I mean, I do have a dissatisfaction in the sense that it's hard to come by really intelligent people, and really, not to say I've been on this before, that my current friends and so forth are not intelligent. They are, but even they would agree that the most intelligent people on the earth are not. they are not, and I probably aren't either. But if I really want to have interesting and insightful conversations and grow, I need to develop relationship with these type of people, and at least some of them, and get to know the public. Really get out with my ideas, and assuming that I have good ideas, and if I not have good ideas, then I shouldn't get out with them, but at least I should seek to justify and get better ideas and really do good for humanity. And yeah, that's my, but how to do that with the internet, I'm guessing this is a good practice. And as I've said when I started these videos, that I think it was the first one I mentioned, that I don't really know if I'm going to publish this, which is quite funny, because if you're watching this, I've sort of assuming that someone is watching, even though I'm on some emotional level, I don't think I will publish these. But actually, when I said that, I get some sort of inspiration and some voice in my head that says, well, maybe you will, and you shouldn't think about it in the terms that you shouldn't. And so, and maybe I actually will publish them, just to confront the fact that that's what's best to do. And again, challenging my preconceptions. Then I have lots of other thoughts that comes up in my mind now, and I will actually challenge my bladder somewhat more and start to talk about, damn, I think I lost the thought. It was about what is that, relationships, getting, yeah, that's the thing. That when let's see, sorry about that, but I'm just like some. What I was thinking about was, by the way, this type of mood that I'm in right now, sort of my music, sort of jolly way of being, is, I think it's really good for me. And I'm going quite much into self-analysis here, maybe more than what's is like sort of a la Kafka. I don't want to be too, or even worse, maybe Marcel Proust, but I do think it's. I just want to be totally blunt and honest about it. I don't think it's. I don't fucking care. And so yeah, I think that this jollness is something good actually. It's sort of my spirit of being so jolly. In some way, so it's some sort of type of the positive way of jolliness that could be for sure associated with sort of not really alpha male, more sort of beta or gamma, I don't know. But anyway, that's another topic. What I wanted to bring up, which was, it was that I've been thinking, yeah, that I could talk about. Last night I get a quite high spike in mood when I was going to, like it was really, what do you say, 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. Well, 12 at night anyway. And I just decided to go to bed. And for an hour or an hour and a half, I just, what happened was that I had sort of, my mind was super sharp. And I've been on a nootropic called Qualia, which is quite intense in some, or it's expensive at least. And I was on it for the second day in a row, but had taken a quite long pause before that. So and I always realize when I've gotten a long pause, it's like with caffeine, you get a higher kick really. And in addition to that, I drank a lot of coffee, even though I've been drinking a lot of coffee the last 1-2 weeks. So and I drank, in addition to really, when I say, well, as I said, in addition to 2 really strong cup of coffees. And when I say strong cup of coffee, I really mean like on the label it says one, what they call when it's a mountain on the scouse thing you use as a spoon. Well, it's sort of mountainous. 1 song per on every cup of coffee, and I usually take 3 of those with a mountain hop for 1, or usually I take 2, but now I've taken 3 the last 1 to 2 weeks. And I take 3 in the morning, and then 3 in at Saturday, and that's standard Swedish coffee, I guess. But I also decided that yesterday, or was it yesterday? Or was it the day before? No, it was yesterday. And I also decided, like, try to break the boundaries and challenge some of my rules that I have in my life. And I did something similar that I did half a week, or even almost a whole week before that. Or actually more than a week. And what I did was I took a cup of coffee like 8 p.m. And usually I don't sleep that good then, and that happened this time too. I was quite hyper till 2 p.m. or a.m. I mean 2:30 a.m. maybe. But anyway, I was, but I took the cup of coffee. I mean, I have a sort of hyperactive mind. So after when I've been on coffee, but it's not that intense, and I really didn't experience it, even though I do feel really great when I take a cup of coffee. So it's sort of an addiction, you could say. I feel good, but not that long afterwards. So I don't think it was the only component that made me so hyperactive, like at midnight. But what happened was that it was some social. I just when I feel really happy and good, or at least hyperactive, because what I did on those times, I was super sort of rational and confronted my deepest held beliefs about which are uncomfortable topics, like, for example, if I should have done otherwise in my choices of education and social interactions there if I should still have an opportunity to go back on something that I sort of socially dreaded, or at least felt very uncomfortable, but not necessarily being sure that just because I felt uncomfortable, it wasn't the case that was something to be overcome, because I wasn't sure that is like the incentive for me to stop the education. I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for a quite high degree of confidence that it was not totally sure that continuing in the education was the best option. Well, in other words, I have reason to doubt the worth of the education compared to what else could do. And not only that it was sort of uncomfortable socially, and so I to confess that, being honest again, that it was some social tension, which it was a management sort of, but that was not, even though that was a contributing factor, that was not, definitely not the only component. I would never have taken, just because even these severe challenges, it was, I mean, I've been going through many of these, like you always have a presentation, as you have a pressure and so forth, but here it could be somewhat different in this sort of the components in this, but I'm not sure that it was really the doubt that this was worth, because if you're not convinced that this is worth it, that is some reward in the future, then why should you do it really? And I have a series, how could I put it more shortly? I don't want to bore you, but so anyway, so it's sort of a doubt that I have. Because it's almost 3 years ago now, did I do the right thing? And I have an opportunity to get back on that horse a couple of months ago, and did the decision to not to, and really contemplating, is this a rational decision? And if I'm not doing it, is this because of my bias to avoid some type of social challenge? Because that's obviously, especially a social challenge when you've been absent and have to go to a new class, of course. And I try to, and I'm quite honest about it, because it might seem to you that I'm socially sort of overreacting, or why do I even contemplate this as something that have an influence on my decision? But I'm not really, I want to point out that I'm not really incorporating this consideration, mainly because I'm extremely socially susceptible to some sort of, I'm just recognizing that is a component that I think is present for everyone when doing a decision. Of course, it could be more present for me, and I think that's the case, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's like enormous. But what I do think is that an honest investigation of whether doing something like that and rational consideration, you have to take in consideration the bias of feeling that it is somewhat a challenge, and you want only to rely on what's rational. And I wanted to confront that again, and I have some reasons to, I don't really remember, but I had some reasons to think that, again, yesterday at midnight, to think that I really wanted to confront what would be rational in the context of what I said earlier. I had a sort of philosophical discussion of doubting and skeptical of really knowing, and then I thought about this as what the science that we know on some level with security. We could apply that and that knowledge and base our decisions on that, and that was really what I was doing, lying on my bed in the dark, trying to sleep and just come up with these ideas, and I'm trying to confront myself on what could I do that is really rational in terms of taking action, do I avoid some social interactions just because I like being alone on some level, and in that situation I figured that maybe I should just, what would I do? But I figured that, and I hope it really, again, not saying that I'm extra susceptible more than others for this, but that I'm trying to be honest of how my thought patterns works, because the thought pattern that came was, it's better, and it's quite an insightful thing to do, I think. I'm not saying that insightful, but it's more insightful than continue to pursue that thought. And I figured that the alternative that was somewhat insightful was to investigate why that state of mind happened in the first place. Why was I so motivated at this point? Because that's something I've been tracking for quite a long time, at least good mood. I try to see what the factors before it and so forth. And often find quite obvious correlation, like being on coffee. But those are not, could be good. I'm not sure it works in the long run. I'm doing an experiment really now to see if I can go on it for a long while, and it seems like some people get better heart rate sort of values, and so for some people it seems to be healthy, and I'm a fast metabolizer of coffee, so yeah. My genes, I did a gene test once, I think. By the way, I bought a different gene test yesterday. It will be really exciting to get the results, but anyway. And so yeah, I decided that was probably the better thing to investigate than pursuing that rational thought thing. But and as I said, as a consideration, I did think about the possibility that I avoided, even though I had the sort of stoic attitude of addressing that question, it could be said that I had avoided doing it contingently, because I subconsciously wanted to avoid to confront that rational consideration, and then preferred to describe and get positive association to instead investigating how the state come about in the first place. And I would like to hear thoughts on that, really, because am I rational in starting to consider that or not? And as usual, commenting on my own contemplations, am I over analytic to even think about the topic in the first place? I don't know. Anyway, I figured that I could read no, I don't want to read all the things because what I did when I was that hyperactive, I got up from my bed and started to write down all the things I could come up with about what that had happened, and it was some type of social interactions and but it wasn't that but one thing I did notice was that one thing that happened during the lecture we had that day, and maybe it's not a coincidence that it was on the same day, but we quite seldom have lectures once a week, but it had been more than 2 weeks ago since the last time, and on this time it was actually a girl who, because it's, if you're not in Sweden, then you won't really get this, but so I have to explain that in Sweden you usually don't talk to strangers, it's just a thing. And so when we're on the lecture, which is some people are taking this course as a free course, and some people are taking it as part of a program, but usually the standard is that 90% during the pauses or after the lecture doesn't talk to each other, and it's quite a so but they have, that's sort of standard. But this girl, which I had eye contact with earlier, she asked me actually a question, and a question that was very ordinary, something about exam, and I'm not necessarily saying that she was indicating some affection, but we did have eye contact, and it could be just a friendly question, of course, and it was to some extent. But just that taking connection with people, obviously you get affected, and this might sound, but I think that for most people out there who are not overly social, this will make sense. But for you who talks to people every day, and but I'm not saying that for me, in the period I'm in my life right now, when I'm trying to not really meet that much people, and when I start to communicate with someone unexpected, it actually, I do think it can have a quite large impact. I don't, not saying that it felt like, I was a little surprised that she said something, but I'm not saying that it's like it was just someone asking a question. How could that have an implication in my mood? But I do think that that's actually is the case, that it had, and it could have an effect like 12 hours later. But that's the key, really. Is that the case? And 12 hours later, why didn't I have it like the whole period? And I think I actually did have, to some extent. I can't remember exactly. Like, I often get into a sort of more aggressive state of mind when I decide to take a cup of coffee at so late an hour. So I think there is one component, but I also think that is this cholinergic had a profound because that hyperactivity is obviously also a component. But anyway, another component, boring you even further with this video, was that there published a video by someone called Daniel Smachtenberger, which is, I really have a difficulty in evaluating him in total, but I think some of his perspectives are really, really accurate and good, especially about sense making. And he published a new video talking about this, he himself, and I just thought it was gold. And that was what I listened to like 10 at night, and it was about an hour or so. And after that, I really did appreciate it deeply, and that's actually one of the videos I listen to when I get sort of depressed today. It was a video I had tried to listen to earlier, which was also about sense making with him and two other guys, but that made me sort of deeply depressed, because it was one aspect of it that was, even though it had philosophical depths with that, which I do really appreciate, it was some aspect of it that was just off for me on my emotional state. I was skeptical on some level, like, is this really, it was, anyway, I won't go deeper into it, but I was quite disappointed because I had so high appreciation of that guy when I listened to that video yesterday, not today, the video yesterday. And after that, I also started to listen to a podcast that I really, really love, and it was because it was a new video that was published between, and it is Eric Weinstein's podcast that's called The Portal. And on The Portal, it was Gary Kasparov. I just watched. I watched sort of 17 minutes or something, but then closed it because I was so tired. And that's when this mood comes. So it was definitely social components happening that was new to me. But at the same time, I've listened to social, like being on YouTube and listen to people talking. That's something I do very, very often. So, and I do think it has a positive impact on my mood. And it's possible that it could have just come of the compound of first having a girl asking me a question, indicating some or having the chance of being some type of affection, which of course is like, because that's actually true. I don't speak to girls that much. Not seeing it necessarily as a problem. I'm just not optimizing for that in my life in the same way I'm not optimizing for relationships yet. If I do optimize for relationships, I mean, like for friends, I do it for only in the long term, which could be a bad strategy. When I say long term, I like in my impact in civilizations, and not necessarily on friends that I already have, which is sort of a gambling. But I had one of the deepest regret people have, even competent people that I have stable lives, is that they lose contact with old friends, and that's not something what I want to do. So I always have a rule of thumb that I reach out when it's gone too long, but usually they respond earlier because I'm quite a solitary guy in that sense. But anyway, relationships, it's similar. I don't optimize for finding, in something I actually see it as something that's in the way for me getting, even though I think it would be very powerful in how I would think I would be much happier. I think I would be really content with life and with my life, and I would think what I would be maybe even inspiration, but I can't know for sure, and it's really a gambling to make. I don't want to get into it because I can't really know the consequence if it's good or bad in the long run, in regard to what my navigation in my life to get in really accordance with my purpose, having an impact and so forth. Certainly not a family at this stage in my life, but just a relationship still seems to not something I optimize for, even though I would like to, like if just pleasure for a short term, for sure, finding a girl and a relationship and in the long run get kids and so forth, definitely something I will do later, but not now. I'm not just optimizing for it. So therefore I don't meet girls that much. It happens now and then. Some of my friends have girlfriends, so for sure I do meet them now and then, but it's not that often. And so this is a single girl, maybe potentially having some sort of affection. I do think it's have an impact, but I realize right now actually that I'm heavily in flow in this video. So despite the darkness, and I think one component is just talking is immensely powerful. And I've been going back and forth in my home in almost 2 hours really. Whereas I'm playing the guitar, I'm just going back and forth and talking and feeling good about it. And I think that shows the power of communication, social interactions and so forth. I really get a deeper appreciation of the social component, but also the obsession I have of, because I don't think I'm narcissistic, but I think I have a need to, even though I have a quite large social sort of social isolation component, I also think I have a strong, I think in my history, like where my ancestors have been and what my cousins, what similar traits they have, is sort of an intellectual and sort of being on the stage personality, despite the fact that some components in my also points towards sort of isolation. So it's both isolation and wanting to be on the stage. And that's sort of a dilemma that I have. And I think it's more present in my, not family, but my forgot the word, but family tree, sort of. I don't know if I should continue even further. I've been talking for a while now, and I just feel I'm in flow, and I think one component of it is definitely, as I said, speaking and so forth, but also qualia, the nootropic amount, it really have large effect. But also one thing more, all my music experience, really almost everything of it have been solitary from at least the last 10 years, or no, not 10 years, but 8 years, last 8 years have been sort of never really, and no one has really heard me sing or play the guitar except my parents, and occasionally when I've had people visiting at my home and so forth, but I never really seldom pick it up except if someone asks. And when I, so yeah, it's and to connect that to a social context like this video, I guess I'm just feel good doing it. But anyway, enough of self-analysis. I just feel I'm in flow, but I think I would go. Don't think I will go even further. It's sort of embarrassing to be so blabby and jolly, and I'm quite tired, to be honest. And my bladder seems to protest quite much. But anyway, have a terrific day or night wherever you are in the world, and I wish you the best of luck in your life and other pursuits. Bye bye.